Hello there. This podcast is going to start out with a somber opening. We will be listening here momentarily to a dear friend of mine, Megan Tweedy. It's a recording of her speaking at an event. It's 3.5 minutes long. It's very short, and she's talking to a group of about 150 people on National Overdose Awareness Day. It was an event that took place in Yakima, Washington. It happens every year. She's going to be talking about somebody that I knew and loved, as did so many other people. Just a diamond of a human being named Jeff Meyer. She and I will have a conversation after you hear this speech, where we're going to be talking about fentanyl. Since Jeff's death from fentanyl overdose these 2+ years back, she's really leaned into understanding and advocating for fentanyl awareness and harm prevention and numerous other things that we'll get into in our conversation afterward. But this little piece of audio you're about to listen to is it's a rich piece of audio, and it gets me choked up every time I listen to it. So here comes Megan from a recording in latter part of August 2022, talking about this wonderful man named Jeff Meyer and his death from fentanyl overdose.
When I spoke last year about the sorrow of my brother Jeff's death in 2020 from a fentanyl overdose, my voice wavered from grief and deception, for I was unraveling the web of illusion he had spun for so many years, publicly betraying his secret. I wanted to believe our shared vulnerability would slow the upward arc of overdose deaths in our community. 73 lives decimated by substance use disorder. The trajectory of 73 families' lives permanently altered by grief. Like a tsunami leveling everything in its path, the swath of devastation, far-reaching and forever. Then 98 sons, brothers, daughters, mothers died last year. This year, the grief has given rise to determination. I must be louder. We all must be louder. Jeff was too sick to be loud. He was plagued by both the disease of addiction and its diabolical twin, shame. His absence has created a void that no amount of remorse, guilt, pain, and beauty can fill. How do you capture the essence of someone you love in a few minutes? Pay tribute to the beauty, compassion, humor, and acknowledge the destruction of the disease. At 6'4", Jeff had a natural gravitational pull. He was charismatic and funny, gifted in his quick-wittedness. He was caring, loyal, a generous friend, and a sensitive soul. As an owner in our family fruit business, he was as comfortable driving the forklift as he was managing the warehouse. His crowning achievement was being a dad to Emma and Ella, who are navigating the nuances of life without a free-spirited and naturally intuitive father. He was also addicted to opioids. He had not, if ever, found a way to live in this world without them. I get up each day unburdened by a disease where I am shamed and stigmatized. So I will use my voice advocating for those who no longer have theirs. I will be louder so people understand that Naloxone, a life-saving medication, doesn't enable anyone. It breathes life back into a failing respiratory system so those we love can live. until we all remove the mask of stigma and see that underneath, people are dying. We will continue to comfort those ravaged by loss. Our loved ones, like us, were beautiful and flawed. They were human.
You know, Megan, people who are joining this will have just heard that amazing piece of audio that you did. And I think you're going to tell me before, but where was that? Where did that happen? And who was in the audience for that?
So that was International Overdose Awareness Day. It's the second year in a row that I've spoken. And the mission of that day is to, first and foremost, honor those who have died, who have lost their lives to overdose. And it's a time for families to come together and really what I view is grieve publicly. I think it's probably more about education than anything, because we don't get maybe a ton of families who are present that have lost a loved one to overdose, but certainly more this year than last year. So my hope is that it's changing. And that also, when I say that, may not be a true statement because it's still very much a hidden disease. So it may be that people are there in the audience who have lost a loved one. Or certainly, I know that there are many in attendance who are in the throes of addiction because they also share. But I am quite outspoken and was very outspoken this year in that I wanted to see the event really focus on that piece of this is a somber time to honor those who have died. And I think this year in particular, it really had that feel.
So I would love to attempt in this little chat to catch somebody up. So fentanyl is a fairly new phenomenon. So it's a new player on the field of addiction. So stop me when I'm wrong, and then add tons to this, Megan. But it's a new player on the field. It's in the opioid category. It is very lethal, and it is taking people who are addicted as well as people who accidentally consume it. And either way, the numbers are skyrocketing because this substance is being consumed everywhere or in a lot of places.
Yes.
Correct me in any of that or add color to any of that.
No, that's exactly right. And I think, Brett, the story that I share often is on the day my brother died, a very horrible day in which I was left to pick up the pieces of notifying all the family members. And horrible for my husband, who was the one to find Jeff's body after he had been dead for 3 days. And the story I share is when the dust settled enough for me to breathe that night, the first thing I did was get on my computer and Google fentanyl. And this is coming from someone who had Googled fentanyl many times before, who thought she understood fentanyl. But I never really did, because it's a confusing topic. So I share that story because that gives you an idea of the vastness of the topic and how hard it is to pinpoint, what issues do we really want to talk about when we're talking about fentanyl. But I can tell you that in Yakima in 2016, there were 0 overdoses related to fentanyl. In 2021, the last year that we have data so far, there were 56 related to fentanyl and 56 of 98. So kind of the statistic that's used often is nationwide. They say 70% of overdose deaths are now related to fentanyl. So, and trying to be brief, kind of the history of it is that we know pharmaceutical grade opioids were prescribed at just unprecedented rates. The data is just stunning. That, at one time, I think every resident in Yakima, in fact, here I'm going to tell you real quickly because I was just reading in the paper, a total of 936,000 prescription pain pills, enough for 36 pills per person per year, were supplied to Yakima County from 2006 to 2014. So we know we had pain pills that were easy to come by, and legitimately people who needed these pain pills. But from there, what happened is drug manufacturers, and when I say drug manufacturers, I mean illicit drug manufacturers, drug cartels, drug dealers, are savvy and they want to make money. And so they are still able to manufacture a very cheap synthetic opioid that does not require poppy fields and natural substances. So it's easy, from my understanding, from, again, podcasts, books, videos I watch, to manufacture fentanyl. And we know that the precursors typically come from China or shipped to Mexico, and then the drug is manufactured predominantly in Mexico and transported into the US very easily, because a very small amount, to give you an idea, very small amount, few grains of sand, for example, can be enough to create a high. And then from there, how much can kill you just depends on the mix. And so I think you had asked me before, and certainly people have asked me before, well, why do drug dealers want to kill off their clients? And I think the simple answer to that is, well, they don't, but they want to make money. And so their first goal is certainly not product purity. It's making money. So if anyone can figure out how to make fentanyl without a degree in biochemistry, there's a potential for it to be manufactured. So that has now created the landscape of where we are today. And that is a very, very addictive drug that, by all accounts, my understanding, requires users like my brother, Jeff, who had been a long-time opioid user. And then when fentanyl came onto the scene, of course he switched over. But it requires the high. And I should even really preface that by saying, someone who has used opioids for as long as Jeff had, more than a decade, you're no longer chasing the high. You're really just trying to avoid getting sick. And by getting what they call dope sick is now every 4 hours. That is the window in which you must continue to use fentanyl to avoid becoming very, very sick. So you've got a very potent drug and a very lethal drug, and people who need to use it often, which is why 107,000 people and counting overdosed in 2021. Again, 70% of them related to fentanyl.
I'm going to I'm going to give I'm going to say that kind of in a different way, and you can correct me, right? So there was a period of time, and I think you said it was 2006, where basically pharmaceuticals companies, and there's some litigation around this, like started prescribing like crazy, and they were, and sort of like the cigarette of the past, these are not addictive, and so pills became just flooded the world for things that likely they didn't need to be prescribed for, and in fact they were very addictive. The feeling one gets from opioids can be overwhelmingly awesome to where they wanted more. So in many cases, people started abusing the pills. Maybe I did some. The answer is I did some, right? So I'm one of those. And what happens for some then is it gets expensive and difficult to come by to get pills because you need a prescription for one. So some people work doctors, but in many cases, what people switch to then would be the cheaper available alternative, which is going to be heroin. So heroin's been around for a long time, and people have been overdosing on heroin as well. So far, so good?
Absolutely. You're tracking this beautifully.
Okay. So to your point a moment ago, the what's required to get heroin requires poppies, right? And giant fields. And if people don't know that are listening to this, that's just true. For heroin, you got to grow poppies and you got to harvest them and everything else. And then in around 2006, I don't know who figured it out, but they figured out a lab version of it, a lab version of a high-powered opioid. So this opioid has now become very available, super powerful. And here's the part that it gets even weirder, is that there is, to your point, there is no quality control. So we got knuckleheads in places building these or making this stuff, and it's coming out on the market, and people think that they're taking a little, and maybe they are, and maybe they're not. Maybe they're taking a lot. Did I get all that pretty accurately so far?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay, so now I want to pitch it over to another part of this story that I think I wasn't aware of, but I think a lot of people, I think that's a good link in this chain. So for a lot of people, and again, me, like it became a thing where I started buying pills, right? So I found sources of buying oxycodone, Percocet, these kinds of pills, and I could hold them in my hand and they look like that, and I went home and ate them, right? So it is my understanding that these drug manufacturers are now taking the fentanyl and pressing them into pills that look like Percocet, like the stuff that people would get in the back of somebody's medicine cabinet, right? That's what they're getting. And so very often what we have here is we've got the folks that know what they're getting and are looking for it, right? We've got the folks that are hooked on fentanyl or hooked on opioids, and now they're doing fentanyl. We've got a drug that is very difficult to know what you're getting. And now we enter another realm, which is we've got people who are selling Percocets or oxycodone, but it's not. It looks like it. It's got the same markings on it. You could look at it online and say, here's a Google search. This is what one of those looks like. But in fact, it's full of fentanyl. Did I get any of that incorrect?
Yep, you're right on. Yeah. And I think you said that, and like in the case of Jeff, and this is where I was confused, he is now seeking out fentanyl. He knows that those pills are fake and pressed with fentanyl. That's the part I did not understand. That took some research, some kind of deep diving on my part of, he was actually addicted to fentanyl by then and was seeking out fentanyl. And then still, though, confused but he knew how lethal it was. So why wasn't he practicing what we now know as harm reduction? Never use alone, use with someone who's got Narcan. And Brett, you are probably better suited to say the statement of that's not your primary focus as someone who is dependent upon opioids. Safety is not your number one focus. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think when somebody pulls in your driveway and pulls out something out of their pocket and in their hand is a pill with some lint and a chewing wrapper and you can't wait to put it in your mouth, I would say that your level of safety concern is very, very low. So yes, and that's a true story. Go ahead. Back to you, Meg.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And you kind of bring into it, Brett, you're so good at really summarizing the issue at hand in trying to get people to understand we're talking about two pathways. We're talking about the opioid addict, the opioid addict, and we're talking about then what I like to refer to as unsuspecting kids, curious kids like you and me who experimented, and they have no idea that these pressed pills, fake pills, are not pharmaceutical grade. They are not coming from someone's doctor, and they have no idea that they contain fentanyl. And before we are meeting today, I kind of dug out all my piles and stacks of paper and research, and what I found was what I was specifically looking for is that researchers at the Tech Transparency Project said they set up multiple new Instagram accounts for teens, and it took 2 clicks for the hypothetical teen accounts to access accounts that claim to be drug dealers. So now we know we've got a super easy way to experiment, to be like, yeah, I've heard about Xanax, I've heard about Percocet, that, and also kids who are in pain. And I'm talking about physical pain and mental pain. And I've heard, well, maybe this can help ease my suffering. And so via an app, they can have a drug dealer come to their house. And these stories kill me. I can't talk about them without crying right now. This is so horrific and heinous. And people still don't know. They do not know. Parents don't know. Kids don't know. And so, yes, we're talking about 2 things facing in the fentanyl crisis that we're facing. We're talking about seasoned veteran users who we need to keep alive so they have a chance to recover. And then we have innocent kids who are like, yeah, just like you and I in high school, more so you, who were like, yeah, let's go bootleg beer. Let's go drink our beer. And I fully confess, I have conversation with my kids a lot. And sometimes I just say, just please, just go get the beer, experiment with the beer. It just don't go near the pills. And they know. And because we talk about it, we lived it. But those are the messages in how I get frustrated at times with some of the prevention work going on, because I'd like to just blow into classrooms and be like, you're going to experiment, go bootleg the beer. Just stay away from the pills. So, and if you do, just please know this is what you are potentially taking. So, I'm not always that's not, as you can imagine, that's not a very popular take on prevention. But it's the truth.
Yeah.
One pill can kill, scare tactic or not, one pill can kill. The DEA has that right.
Yeah. Well, you and I are both what are called ambassadors, right? Like, I'm an ambassador for this really cool group called Shatterproof, and we were on a call a couple weeks ago, right? And a woman, another ambassador on the call, shared about she was a mother, right? So look up shatterproof.org at this point in the call. If that's interesting to you, go to shatterproof.org, check them out. They're awesome. We're both ambassadors. One of the other ambassadors who I'd never met before was a mother, a grieving mother who lost her son to an overdose. And she used a word that I hadn't heard before that you schooled me up on, right? She said, my son died from fentanyl poisoning. Now, she didn't use the word overdose. So afterwards, as is kind of something that Megan and I do, is we'll hop on calls and she'll educate me. So this word fits this part of the story to me. So why don't you explain when somebody says fentanyl poisoning versus overdose, what's happening there?
So that is in reference to the kids who I'm talking about who are dying, who in this particular mom, Michelle, her son had died of a fentanyl-laced Xanax. He had gone online and purchased a Xanax, had no idea it contained fentanyl. He was not an addict. He was not in, language now we use substance use disorder versus addiction, but I just often use addict. So he was not an addict. Michelle and many moms who have had their children die by fentanyl poisoning don't want their son or daughter classified as an addict. And that right there should be end of story. It does not matter what their reason is, whether that is helping stigma or shame, it doesn't matter. They earn that right. And if they want their loved one, their son, daughter, grandson, niece, nephew, categorized as death by fentanyl poisoning, absolutely, we should be clarifying that. And interestingly enough, this came up again. It comes up a lot. I attended a University of Washington med school and their campus at Gonzaga, and I attended virtually. And it was addressing the fentanyl crisis in Spokane. And it's currently what I'm working on in Yakima, is bringing the same thing to Yakima with real experts in the field of addiction, people who study the data, who work in the trenches. And a mom shared there during question and answer. It was the same story. Her son went to Gonzaga. He had a prescription for Xanax. He was out of it. And so he bought it online, and it contained fentanyl. And she was rightly so emotional is the word I would use, in calling out the panel of speakers and saying, why are you not calling this fentanyl poisoning? This was not an overdose. And I think that's a really important distinction to be making in this conversation, because it means something to those parents. And, the one of the panelists said, well, it's kind of a technical term, overdose, meaning it was too much of a dose. But I still would argue that let's try and use that language as best as we can. If some, I have no problem. Jeff died of a fentanyl overdose. He was addicted. And yeah, I think it's important to parents. And so I'm supporting them 100%.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I'm hoping to do with this podcast and our conversations and everything else is educate people. So when I hear a word like that, now, if you hear a word like that, if you're listening to this podcast and you hear somebody say fentanyl poisoning, you'll know the distinction, right? And I think it's good to know that, right? I think that's useful, because it also helps tell the story of what fentanyl is and how it's infiltrating, kids and different places beyond those that are also addicted to it and are seeking it out. So,
Yes.
so thank you for going through that. So I'd like to pivot now to some solution stuff. And you use the word. I'm guessing there's a large bunch of people on this call that have never really understood what's this Narcan business all about, right?
It's harm reduction. That's the term. Harm reduction is Narcan. I'll explain that in a second, but what I really want to explain is the term harm reduction, because harm reduction is wearing a condom or using birth control if you do not want to have a baby. It is insulin for diabetics. It's harm reduction, so you don't go into a diabetic coma. It's CPR for someone who's having a heart attack. Harm reduction is administering CPR. Narcan is an opioid reversal medication that, when administered, basically breathes life back into a failing respiratory system. And we know that Narcan saves lives by 6%. As we know, it reduces death by 6%. And it's not yet as easy to come by as I believe the landscape is changing. So it will become easier to come by. But it saves lives. End of discussion. That's okay. What it is.
The stat there, I want to make sure that I got that. The 6% you're saying is not the effectiveness at the time of administration. You're talking about right. 6% that out in the field, about 6% of these overdose that's what it's currently doing in the field, the macro,
yep.
right?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And that's based on people who are overdosing, which, by the way, is also an interesting facet. We have a ton of people overdosing and living. And that is due to Narcan. So that number will go up. And yeah, we do. We have people overdosing and living. And that's thank God.
So, and now I'm going to say what I think Narcan is, and you can correct me again. I think it's a nasal spray. Yes. I think it goes to work immediately. And I think it's true that if I were to take some right now and shoot it up my nose, it wouldn't cause me any trouble. So it's basically inert it's not like we're going out there with it, getting people high, but it's like a nasal spray, and it instantly counteracts the respiratory failure of somebody who's overdosing on fentanyl. Is that fair?
That is accurate. Yes.
It's not a dangerous substance in and of itself, correct?
Correct. Yes.
So it stands to reason then, like somebody who would become certified in CPR, right, that drives around and may never use it. Similarly, perhaps this is a suggestion, including for myself, that I have some on me in case I see something occur, say in the parking lot at Safeway or something along those lines. Is that fair?
Yep, absolutely. And I'll just interject. You can get it for free at stopoverdose.org, stopoverdose.org. And that's in Washington State. Other states have their own websites, but, and there's in Washington State, we have a standing order too, that you can also anyone can get it through their pharmacist. That can be a little tricky because I've talked to people who are now starting to say, okay, I'm going to go get it. And they do. And they go to their pharmacist. And then I spoke with one woman and she's like, oh, yeah, but I didn't like it. They ran it through my insurance. And now I'm worried my insurance thinks, and I tried to reassure, no, I doubt your insurance does think you're addicted to opioids. But next time, go to stopoverdose.org and there are places you can get it for free. And that's my kind of biggest hope at the moment. I feel like there is a lot of talk around naloxone, Narcan, and we're going to start seeing more of it. But what I like about it the most, Brett, well, other than the fact it saves lives, is, I struggle with prevention. And I know it's because, like you, were a product of the, war on drugs and DARE era that we know did not work. And a lot of fear mongering. And so I hear the word prevention and I kind of clam up because that's what I still associate. I associate DARE with prevention. I know that's not accurate. I know there are many, many really good evidence-based prevention strategies that are being implemented. How I like to look at prevention purely, again, from my lane of what do I do? What am I doing? I'm a community activist working to prevent death by fentanyl overdose. I like to look at the opportunity to talk about Narcan as prevention, because if you were to do a Narcan training, you don't have to do it. It's as easy as you just read the packaging and you're exactly right. How it's administered is nasally. But when you have an opportunity, for me as an Narcan trainer, that's prevention, that's education, because there's a whole kind of spiel behind it. The training takes 45 minutes. Well, it's 45 minutes of really important and good information that is being administered to the public around opioids. What are they? What is their purpose? Why do we have them? And why, again, like we shared at the beginning of the podcast, how do we get from opioids to fentanyl? And so, to me, harm reduction and prevention go hand in hand. And that's where I get uptight when schools don't want to readily embrace Narcan. I just sends me through the roof.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even I'll just add a little seasoning to this conversation when you were talking about your friend who didn't want their insurance to run it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's an example too, where that shame and stigma, right?
Totally.
So let's just say this person did have a problem, right? And they are looking out for themselves or whatever. That's not a gateway to potentially the beginnings of access to healthcare to address the disease is tough, because suddenly the shame and stigma shows up. Principals aren't just like, hell yeah, it's going to be in the bathrooms. Somebody hell yeah, it's at the pharmacy for free. And not only that, but you don't have it in your glove box. Well, you should. And there's no shame around this. We're looking out for each other. Guess what? People do recover that have this disease.
Yeah, Brad, it's such a good reminder. I know where you were going, is that people can go on to live healthy lives. Like, I was just listening to your first podcast, and that's what struck me the most, is just two dudes in recovery, just laughing about and looking back on the things that you were so ashamed to share. And I love that about it. It's just life. We're just humans trying to deal with our shit. And to be able to have that hindsight, I don't, well, of course, I wish that I had that with my brother. I mean, of course, it doesn't make me want to listen to stories of success less often. I could sit around like you and talk about addiction all day and listen to people's stories. And so, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but thank you for doing this podcast, because I learned a ton just from listening to two dudes sitting around talking.
Yeah. Well, you and I have been communicating about addiction now for at least, I'd say it's been a good year now, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so. Yes. Yeah.
And just to admit my ridiculousness and mental capacity, like it's only been this month that I've really understood fentanyl. And so thank you for being patient with me and moving me towards understanding it better. And so that potentially people that listen to this who are similar, who don't know much about fentanyl will know some things that they didn't know before. And that this thing is with us. It isn't going anywhere probably. And so, a little education be useful for everybody, I think.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, Brett, to kind of piggyback on that is I use quote a friend of mine. He's become a friend of mine. We don't have a DEA office in Yakima, but he's a detective and he's on the DEA task force. And he said to me, he's like, we will never win the war on drugs. America's appetite is too huge. And it was just so profound because I'm like, if we can all embrace that, fentanyl is here to stay. You can talk about the borders and securing them all you want. But until drug dealers, manufacturers, whomever stop making money, it is not going away. It is a source of income. And I think just always trying to come at it from that argument, which I'll tell you is really impossible because everything is politicized these days. But that brings me hope that I've got a friend who's a DEA agent whose job is to prosecute drug dealers and all the complexities behind that. But I can listen to him and he can listen to me. And we may not agree on everything, but I have such admiration and respect for him because he also is saying, I'm tired. I am tired of basically finding bodies of he's one of the first on scene too. And so I think this idea of talking about it also has to extend to talking about it amongst everyone, whether you're going to agree or not. And I've been kind of lately guilty of this, of not really wanting to talk to legislators anymore. It's just like, it's not really me talking. It's just really me listening. So what's the point? But I know I cannot close that door. Like it just has to be everyone around the table looking at ways that we can keep people alive. And that's what I want to do. Keep people alive. We cannot help them get into recovery. We cannot help them recover if they're not alive. And so fentanyl is just killing too many people.
Yeah. Well, this has been, as usual, I dig our conversations. It's been a very meaningful addition to my life these past months where we get together and talk through some of this stuff. I usually point people to shatterproof.org because I just feel like it's a great catch-all.
It's so good.
Yeah. So for those of you that are more interested in more information, shatterproof.org is tough to beat, and you can donate money there too, which is cool.
Yep.
If you happen to be a Cisco employee, for those, it's matched. So you will find shatterproof.org in Bright Funds because I anticipate a few folks coming in from there. So that's also available. So
yeah, it's just a great website. It just is. It has everything. Yeah. And again, Washington State, because I like a lot of the info on stopoverdose.org too. So yeah, thanks, Brett, for doing this. You're a natural, and anytime I get to come on, I really appreciate it.
Right on, Megan. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. I want to just make a huge shout out to my friend Megan Tweedy for her courage and for her leadership and in this important space of fentanyl education and and until our next time together. Take care.